cracking away games in the 8-yard.
Broadcasting live to the world. Now, it's Sheila Zielinski.
This is a very sinister Luciferian eugenics plan. These spineless weasels preach what people want to hear. They replace repentance with dreams of the good life. Mindless minions. Dying daily, taking up your cross, suffering and sacrificing have been superseded with name it and claim it. And as dark as I know it looks out there, the good news is that God is advancing his kingdom. And it's very exciting to be a part of his great commission.
It's Sheila Zielinski. The Sheila Zielinski Show, the only show to give you the truth behind the headlines, prophecy, and the deeper things of God. Now, here is your host, end-time watchwoman, Sheila Zielinski.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to this edition of the Sheila Zielinski Show. Thank you all so much for tuning into the program today, folks, and a big shout-out to all the listeners from WWCR and to all you listening around the globe. And thank you for joining us on that prayer for Dr. Kent Hovind. I believe it was very powerful. Folks, I am very excited today to introduce you to my guest. My guest is Ted Flynn. He is a highly acclaimed speaker and author, and he's the author of a book that was very instrumental in waking me up, the book entitled Hope of the Wicked, The Master Plan to Rule the World, which details many of the agendas of the global community. And let me tell you, the content in this book is staggering. It was written way before there was this big awakening there is now. And let me remind you that there were very few of us awake when this book came out, and we were awake when awake wasn't cool. We were the tinfoil hat conspiracy kooks. But what is so exciting is his new book, and it is a very timely book indeed, The Great Transformation, Finding Peace of Soul in Troubled Times. And oh, are we not in troubled times? Ted Flynn, it is the first time I've had you on, and it is a pleasure, sir. Welcome to the program.
Well, thank you very much. After doing a little research and learning about you, it looks like we're kind of kindred spirits to boot.
I would say definitely. I'll tell you, when I first read your book, that is a book that is worth reading. You had something like 1,200 footnotes in that book.
I did. You know, it was an interesting thing. I wrote the book for me. I had always wanted to write a book since I was, frankly, a boy. I've always been just a huge reader. You know, I started about 9 years old reading, Frank and Joe Hardy, the Hardy Boys, and I finished them all. And then I've just always been a reader. And the way that book started, I was a student at the London School of Economics in the mid-'70s. And I had seen a quote, John Kennedy, young John Kennedy, President Kennedy went there, and Daniel Moynihan, and it's kind of been, it's a school of political science and economics. And there was a quote that I had seen there at 23 years old where Joseph P. Kennedy said to his young son, John, when he was the ambassador to the court of St. James under Roosevelt, he said, John, I'm going to take you to a dinner tonight, and there'll be the 12 people that run all of Europe. And, at a 23-year-old, it's an interesting statement coming from a man who was in the top 10 income in all of the United States at that time. And then, and then Roosevelt put him ahead of the SEC after the Depression. It was kind of like the fox in with the hens. And so I found that as an interesting statement. And then I just began to read, economics is not a science, it's more philosophy. And I was just reading a lot, and I just saw this thread that there is a group of people, whether or not you wanted to get into the big, powerful families and or the Johnson and Johnsons and the Rothschilds. These are very, very real dynasties. They're very real people, and there's an agenda. And over 25 years, I just read, and I've been employed. I just did a lot of this because I enjoyed it. I've just been a reader. And then in the late 70s, I read a book called None Dare Call It Treason, and None Dare Call It Conspiracy. Now, those books had 5 million copies in print, and yet nobody talked about them, which I found stunning. 5 million copies in print. Remember John Stormer, very thin book?
Yeah.
And then the book that really capped it all, that I saw that this was a very, very real issue of people with dynasties, whether it be political or financial, that there was an agenda that they had among a group of people. And it was a book by Carol Quigley. Many of your listeners will know that book for sure. And he had been a student at Princeton, then taught at Harvard and then Georgetown. And the name of the book was called Tragedy and Hope.
That is a huge book, actually, isn't it? That is one massive book.
That is a book that is so credible that, Bill Clinton became a Rhodes Scholar as a result of Carol Quigley. And if anybody goes back and listens to the first inaugural address of Bill Clinton, they'll see that the only person he thanked was Carol Quigley. And that book was, it was published by Macmillan and Son, and he had, Quigley had access to the vaults of large institutions and families that talked about their agenda. But apparently, they let him in probably due to ego that he was writing about them, but they didn't know that he was going to put a book together that basically spoke about an agenda of the rich and the powerful that the average person has no idea that this really exists. And so then, you just did more reading on environmentalism and all of the issues and the political philosophy of people and organizations and big banks. And if you want to find a group that's really running the world today, it's banks. If you want to find a group that is virtually running medicine and everything to do with health, it's pharmacy. It's basically the drug companies. And then I had seen a report that showed, or it was in the Wall Street Journal, to really fast forward here, of how true a lot of this material is. About 7 or 8 years ago, the Wall Street Journal did an article that showed, if anybody had ever seen that, it was very, very famous. It got very well known and circulated around the net. And that the journal showed there were 144 companies in America that basically ran the country. Now, let me tell you how real that is. There's something called an SIC code, which is a standard industrial classification code, where you'll have things like mining, automobile manufacturing, pharmacy. You'll have manufacturing in general, autos, steel. And if you were to take a look at, whether it's semiconductors, take an SIC code, you can see a vertical integration in these industries where there's 4 or 5 or 6 or maybe even 7 that control market share, 80, 90, 95%. The 80-20 rule, 20% rule 80% of any industry. Right. And so then they projected that out to the world, and they showed like Vanguard that had, interlocking relationships throughout all types of industries, and that there were really just a few companies and entities and banks, and you see the consolidation of banks, HSBC, and used to be Shanghai, and just the big banks. Look how many of the 6 or 7 big banks control most of America. Very easy to see. Bank of America and just a few banks. J.P. Morgan. We used to have 5 great investment banks up to September of 2008. Now we're down to really 3 or 4 big ones. With Lehman and Bear Stearns going belly up in September of 2008. But you can see the thread of a group. And so after the book came out, the book was way, way ahead of where most people were at. And I was considered for, several years after the book came out, kind of the resident conspiracy theorist, the resident lunatic, However, nobody could challenge my facts. Hope of the Wicked had 1,200 footnotes in it. And that was not my view. Those were the words, the policies, the agenda of a global elite with an agenda to not so much control the way you and I would use it, but to perpetuate their agendas. People can see how true a lot of this material is now since Obama's been elected. The book took off in a whole nother dimension when Obama got elected because, frankly, it is about control. And, Princeton, I like to quote a lot of the bigger entities, because if it comes from me, who am I? But if I can put a really good footnote down there with a quote, there's more credibility and veracity to that. So I saw something just about mid-December of 2014, a couple of months ago, where Princeton University released a study using well over 1,000 data points. I think it was something like 1,500. But without being, paraphrased, it was well over 1,000 data points that they said, the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton, that the United States is no longer a democracy or a republic. It's in essence an oligarchy run by special interests. That's exactly what Hope of the Wicked was about. But, it was just too far ahead, and when I did a lot of the, radio and TV on that, because the book did come out in 2000, but somebody would always bring up, that I was the resident lunatic conspiracy theorist. So when I started the program, I always brought this up. Now, we're way, way beyond that now, Sheila, to where we are. People now see that there's an agenda that's very, very insidious and, frankly, diabolical for the control of virtually the soul of mankind right now. And you can just see an agenda that is far beyond the means of most people's understanding that, in essence, evil never sleeps. That's
Absolutely.
Where we're at.
Well, and that's a really good segue to your newest book that just came out here in January. And I love what you yourself used in your own words, saying the events are unprecedented, and the ones that are on the horizon, the events that are on the horizon have never happened in all of history. And we've had some pretty incredible things go on throughout history. The world is going through tremendous changes at a speed beyond the control of anyone or any nation, and the anxiety and stress in our midst is readily apparent to nearly everyone. Even people with the most virulent case of normalcy bias, the bystander apathy, even they say, Ted, something stinks in Denmark here. And as the world goes through, as you allude to this word, a great transformation, I want you to get into that, because as we move towards the second Pentecost, what can we expect here? I mean, get into that a little bit.
Well, this is my heart, mind, and soul. I mean, I've been doing what I've been doing now for 39 years as an avocation, vocation, publisher, speaker, author, distributor, and we have a family business that's been a distributor of books along this now for 26 years. And we approach life as much as we live in Washington, D.C. area. We approach it, we're not Democrats or Republicans. We're basically trying to be Christ-centered. Because I've been here now for, 38 years in the Washington, D.C. area. And no matter who's in power, it'll be abused. Divided government is the best government for a republic like the United States, because whoever will get in power, like you saw with Obama having, the presidency, the House, and the Senate, you just saw the shoving through of awful legislation, and the checks and balance system is no longer working. The great transformation is generally about this. The subtitle is called Finding Peace of Soul in Troubled Times. This book is dealing with the fact that the world is going through a transformation, and there's a chapter where I give from a Christocentric point of view, where I think major events took place that altered the destiny of not just nations but civilization itself. One, if Abraham or the flood, or you could get into the bubonic plague, World War I, World War II, to something that has governed mankind's life since 1945 with Bretton Woods, with the introduction of the World Bank, the IMF, the IFC, International Finance Corporation, and, where the United States then was the true reserve currency for the world. So I list about 30 or 35 key dates that absolutely altered the destiny of civilization itself. And it would be hard-pressed for somebody to say that after 60 million people perished in all theaters of World War II, all the way up to the firebombing of Dresden and Tokyo, 60 million people perished in World War II. That's a significant event. The bubonic plague, 175 million people perished all throughout Europe, that altered Europe for the next 150 years. I'm saying that the world now, due to the confluence of events, whether you want to take banking or nuclear capability, all of the social indices in the world, they're all broken. Nothing's working as it should. That in and of itself is a barometer and an indicator of where the world is headed, that we're moving into a new dimension that the world has never seen. Now let's look at that in a prism where we turn the two facets of the diamond. One is that the historian would say that is history itself. It's not a static process. It's very, very dynamic. That's absolutely true. But what the historian does not recognize in that equation for the story of civilization itself, it's the Lord who raises up, and it's the Lord who brings down. It's the Lord who puts up a protective hedge, and it's the Lord who takes it down due to sin. He puts the hedge up due to virtue and following his commands, statutes, and ordinances. But then if it becomes to be a proud nation, that hedge is taken down and it ends up on the ash heap of history. The United States had a protective hedge around it for a long, long time. I believe that the United States was the greatest nation in the history of the world, the way that we were formed, the Constitution, the Founding Fathers, the adherence to a Bill of Rights, a Constitution that no nation ever had. It is my personal opinion that we are under judgment now, and the protective hedge has been taken down. Now, if you look in the Old Testament, there's 4 principal ways where the Lord gets the attention of his chosen people, the Hebrews. And that he does. That's the history of the Old Testament. Number 1, they can decay from within due to immorality, which you can see in Isaiah specifically 6, 7, 8, 9, and it's all over, Jeremiah, etc. You can see that as a theme. 2, from an enemy from without. 3, weather alters the destiny of a nation, which you can see in many, many places. And 4, Israel was given a bad king. Well, guess what? Take a look at the United States.
I was just going to say, we've got all those check marked, don't we?
We've got, we're a nation here that is in steep, rapid decline. And in Hope of the Wicked, I show the 8 points on the ascent and the descent of a nation, from, all of the stages. And once it gets to the peak of prosperity, which can take 200 years, then it descends very, very rapidly because sin abounds. And there's pride and arrogance that they think they did it, but they forgot the generations that came before them in migration and self-rule and, in virtuous living was rewarded by the Lord. We have forgotten God. And I make a point in the book, The Great Transformation, that we're not being punished by God. This is not the vengeful God. And that is a very, very misunderstood issue when people specifically read the the Old Testament. Isaiah 59:2 says, "It has been your sin that has separated you from God." It is your sin that has separated you from God. The more we turn away from the Lord, our shadow lengthens. The more we walk away from the sun, our shadow lengthens. And so we're not being punished by God, but the Lord in all of his mercy gives us free will. And that must have been a battle in heaven itself.
One of the things I love about your book is that it offers solutions and answers that we need for that word peace of soul that's right there in the book title for the events that lie ahead, because we can expect to see some spectacular, cosmic, really spectacular events in the near future, maybe the very, very near future. Heaven has a plan and never moves without informing their prophets in advance. And the Bible lays out a blueprint and prescription, really, to those who are under the, you just mentioned that word, being under the hedge of protection. And we're told how to respond in these times, aren't we? These perilous times, the Bible calls it.
Yeah, it couldn't be more simple. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. Thou shalt not, put any idols in front of me. In the year 2002, I did a book called Idols in the House, which is just the most simple thing in the world. There's 10 commandments. 3 of those are man's relationship to God. They're vertical. First happens to be the idol. And then if you look at the remaining 7, they're man's relationship to each other. That's a horizontal plane of how we relate to each other. If you get the first one wrong, nothing else goes right. I kind of committed a faux pas of really writing to put so much scripture in one place, but I put the entire chapter of Deuteronomy 28 in the book. The entire chapter. That is the law, the Deutero, the law. And it's called the blessings and the cursings of a nation. It's just the way God designed the world. If we're obedient to him, if we're following his statutes and we're doing what he tells us, life goes better. In Deuteronomy 28, there's only 14 verses of blessings.
But there's sure a lot of curses, isn't there?
Well, you've read that chapter to know that, And so, it's so simple. I will bless your marriage. I will bless your family. I will bless the produce of your land. I mean, you don't need a PhD to understand this, This is just very, very, very clear. As I say, the Bible is so well written, you don't need to be an intellectual to even understand it. It just goes straight to the heart and to the soul. Then in verse 15, it segues, what I call the if-then clause. If my people do not do this, then. It's the if-then clause. That's where you transition to disobedience. Now you go for the next 55 verses of cursings. I will let foreigners overtake your industry. I will let foreigners overtake your land. Foreigners will come in and buy your land. Foreigners will tell you what to do and how to live. So for 55 verses is cursings, and as little as 14 is blessings that just cover the whole gambit. We forgot God. Our problems in the United States and the world, they're not political, they're moral. That's what our problems are. We have moral problems. We're not going to solve anything political right now because we don't have God's mind for it. And this is the progression of a nation that's living outside of the will of God with a protective hedge that has actually been taken down. And you talk about where we're headed. There's going to be some events. Now, we're in March of 2015. My kids joke that I've never been wrong. And I've never been wrong on the issues because I never guess a date. I've never put anything to do with a date. And since I've been at this thing so long, I've seen every single person who tries to put a date to a certain event has never been right. However, we are moving into a time now that, as I say, is unprecedented. And the confluence of events is so dramatic, so strong, so compelling, that some of the greatest financial minds now in the world, all over, are now believing that disaster is very, very soon to come upon us, whether it's going to be in the heavens, cosmic, geologic, in the seas, the financial system that's broken. I had a conversation with somebody just today on derivatives. And people speak about the United States, with the debt by the time Obama leaves will be somewhere between maybe 19 and $20 trillion. That's not sustainable. These numbers are so big because we've lost our manufacturing base and debt. It's actually much bigger than that. The Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, which is the central bankers' bank in Basel, has put the derivative issue worldwide at $710 trillion. $710 trillion. People like David Stockman and others, Blackstone, big investment banks, even 60 Minutes about a year ago, put the derivative problem at $250 trillion. That's what this Bank of International Settlements is putting the U.S. derivative problem at. And that's why we are looking for, something to do with a currency reset. Will it be a basket? Will it be a reserve currency? Will it be backed by gold? Will it be a special drawing right that the IMF has wanted literally since 1968, the SDR that Soros is pushing? Will the United States be in the basket? Will it, as they say, will it be backed by precious metals? The answer to that question is really nobody really knows yet. And those that know don't tell, and those that tell don't know, I guess. But we're coming into an era in the world, an ERA, an epoch in the world that has never, ever been seen before. And all of the money has been and is dramatically shifting from the west to the east. You can see the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, where they have their new $100 billion investment bank based in South Africa. You can see China and Russia with a new $400 billion oil and gas from Russia to China to sustain that engine. And the United States is out of that. The United States is very much in a position of isolation with a lot of the world due to, frankly, some awful and horrifically bad foreign policy. That it's actually been deliberate. And this is the part that's so hard for people to wrap their head around. This has been a deliberate destruction of the United States from within.
The United States, if you look historically, there's so many parallels between Germany and the United States. It's frightening, isn't it?
Well, even the Gun Act in the United States, we've been using the 1930 Gun Act of Germany. I used to use Germany. I've kind of had an understudy of the Weimar Republic, what happened in the 30s, how the Treaty of Versailles after World War I boxed the Germans in. They felt like they had no other way to go but to tool, and then the paper hanger from Linz came in as an economic savior. People, once they leave God, once they begin to lose sight of divinity and spirituality, they're going to latch on to something political. And there isn't a person listening, probably over the age of 15 or even younger, who has not seen the movie Ben-Hur. Now, I've seen it probably 4 or 5 times. I've always enjoyed the movie. It's always on, towards Easter and that kind of thing. And there's a really interesting scene in there based right out of human nature and politics. And there's the scene where it's very early in the movie where Masala comes in and he meets Charlton Heston, as David Ben-Hur. They're talking, remember their boyhood relationship, and they were throwing the spear, down in the basement of a building, and they were buddies. And Marsala says something really interesting to him, that is how empires grow and people begin to put faith in politics over God. And do you remember the scene where he says to him, "Come with me, come to Rome, come, the glory of Rome, to see what we can do, to see this mighty empire and things that we can conquer, things that we can do. All of the things that Rome has accomplished. Look at what we've done in this whole world." And it's all political. It's an interesting scene because Charlton Heston is standing there as a young Hebrew man who is very well respected and moneyed even for that time in the world by looking at their place of domicile. But the answer for that man was all political in the power of it all. That's where the United States and the world is. They're all seeking human solutions because that's all they have to grab onto.
Well, when you talked about, a minute ago, you were talking about Russia and China and the BRICS, and you had mentioned Bretton Woods, and I was thinking, the jig is up, though, really, isn't it? The Great Depression playbook is exposed here. I would say it's the mother of all Ponzi schemes, really has been revealed. I mean, forget being cited. We're being vetted as the source of all the bond fraud, the source of all the Forex fraud, the source of all the gold market fraud, the source of all the derivative fraud. I mean, emerging markets are figuring out that the fake fraudulent system, and nobody wants to do business with a crazy, out of control, sociopathic group of lunatics running the U.S., really. I mean, so it's incredible when you step back and take a macro view, Ted, and you see what's happening. I mean, the death of the dollar is here, and everybody is easing away from that big, mighty juggernaut of the U.S. dollar, isn't it?
It's refreshing to hear somebody like you, because most people don't see this on the macro level, and this is what I said. I'm not raising a white flag saying it's all over. I'm simply saying that we're moving into another dimension in the world, that it's going to be the Lord's way. We have to come to this new era, this second Pentecost, this new Jerusalem. We have to these systems have to break down. They cannot exist as they do today and continue to move to where the Lord can move freely. We're now entering a phase where all of the world systems, everything you mentioned and 200 more, are badly broken.
Yeah.
The ECB is busted. I saw something just the other day. The debt, if anybody Googles this, they can find this. It was only about 3 weeks ago. The debt to GDP, I saw it on Zero Hedge. The debt to GDP of 33 countries in the world is over 100%.
Yeah.
9 countries were over 300%. Over 300% debt to GDP. That's not sustainable in any way, and I was surprised to see a few of the countries. I didn't think the Netherlands, which has always been a trading nation, I was surprised to see them in the top 10. Japan, although they trade their debt internally, is 400%. You're looking at what's happening in Argentina, Greece, Cyprus, Poland. These problems are systemic. They're all over the world, and the world that we know is passing before our very, very eyes, and it's going to come into a new totalitarian regime. Whether you want to just take the issues of vaccines, there isn't anything that you can pick as a social indice that's working as it was designed to do.
I think of Dodd-Frank essentially giving the keys of your saving account to Wall Street and the City of London's too big to fail banks, and they're going to steal every penny that people think they own the minute they get into trouble and need another bailout. I mean, this is not some wild futuristic nightmare, Ted. Congress passed the Dodd-Frank bill and Obama signed it into law. It is outright treasonous. And think of the hyperinflation that is built into the system, the magnitude of the debt. The program is to apply the full weight of the debt, the hyperinflation, and take it out on the citizens. And Dodd-Frank means, and nobody bats an eye when you hear that term, but Dodd-Frank means the mass murder, to me, in my opinion, of every U.S. citizen. I mean, we'd all be dead, at least the 20-plus transatlantic nations. This is collecting, they're doing a sweep of every penny. So it's almost like the priority over human life, over the sovereignty of nations, over everything that's valued in this, as you talked about being the greatest nation. You know, the Declaration, the Constitution is a functioning of a bankrupt criminal enterprise, globally active, so-called systematically important financial institution. And these things are just an outright attack on our republic. And it's not just a removal of Glass-Steagall, but it's a removal of everything to the point of starvation, no jobs, you know, derivative obligations. We're talking about no way out. And it just is amazing how people are still walking around in a stupor.
You know, the book has been out only for 2 months, 2.5 months. You just said it's over. I leapfrog all of the social data, all of the news, and I have a lot of good friends who have been doing this. We have an organization that is a distributor of a lot of books on these subjects for 26 years. I now lump people into 2 categories, and I really mean this. There are those now who get it. They understand what's going on. They understand what environmental is about. It's about a world tax. It went from, now it's climate change. Before it was global warming. Now that it's getting cold, they're calling it climate change. They're basically brainwashing people through the news. ABC News nearly every single night for several years. First segment was about news, with somebody standing in an inch and a half of water and saying, "Oh my God, it's never rained like this." They're programming people for climate change.
It's a climate crisis now, Ted.
Well, now the funny thing is, if you were to do an overlay of the United States of America or even the world, forget just what's happening here, this is a worldwide systemic problem. If you were to do an overlay of the United States, you would not find any one region or even one state that has not been really, really adversely impacted by severe weather that has decimated state, local, and federal budgets. And I have data in the book showing from 1993 with Hurricane Andrews, 93 or 4, Katrina, Superstorm, Sandy, $60 billion in damage in disbursements from the federal government, of how that's affected insurance, state, local, municipal governments, first responders, businesses, and every single area. And I leapfrog all of these issues to simply say that the world that we knew is over. You want to talk about Dodd-Frank, you can talk about something that passed only about 5 or 6 weeks ago, where pension funds no longer, signed into law by Congress, hidden in a bill, that pension funds no longer need to go to the Pension Fund Guarantee Association of America for approval, but the trustees of pension funds now can make decisions themselves on how much they lop to stay solvent.
Right.
So you're going to see people very, very shortly. Never mind the 93 million that are out of work, 10,000 a day going on Social Security, 48 million on food stamps. All the Social Security disability income that's actually forming a pool of really unemployment with people abusing it. 65%, mind-numbing number, are indirectly or directly getting money from the federal government, state governments, or some form of government agencies. 65%. That's not sustainable. That's the whole point of this. I had a doctor tell me the other day, who's been in the ER for 35 years. He said, "I work for the government." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Every single person that's coming into the ER is an illegal immigrant or just people abusing the system that are all on government assistance." He said, "Very, very few people come into the ER in an emergent situation." Now, here's a guy 35 years in the ER. You can believe this guy. A big, big believer, and he says the illegal crowd, as soon as they want to write up on something, all they've got to do is say, "I've got chest pains." They know the system, and they're being brought there even in ambulances because they don't even want to pay for a taxi. He said, "I, in essence, work for the government as a doctor in the ER." Think about that. But so I leapfrogged this whole conversation we're talking now, that until we get to the spiritual and begin to focus in on what is most important, putting the entertainment away, saying no to the frivolous, and beginning to focus in, because in the very near future, and I'm saying it's coming faster and faster. This is a Shemitah year. This is the tetrad, 2014 and 15 of the 4 blood moons, which is NASA data, as well as using from the Old Testament of how the Lord communicated with his people through signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, starting all the way back in Genesis 1, that we are, and this is the 9th tetrad, literally since Jesus was on the cross. This is the 9th one. It always bodes poorly for Israel. And so we're looking again at all of these issues that are pointing to we are shortly going to lose everything. And I'm not a prepper. A lot of people think that a person like me would be a prepper. I actually believe that you cannot protect yourself to the degree that people think they can. And let me explain that. In other words, if you've got a leaky roof, fix it. I'm not talking about things like that. To the degree that you can be self-sufficient and do things for yourself, which was considered virtuous in the United States, all the way up until just recently. And now if you're thinking for yourself, you're labeled pretty much right-wing whack job. And that's the way the government is labeling you and trying to target you and data mine you as a subversive element to them.
Yeah, we're a terrorist now.
Oh, yeah. Boy, if I don't know if you all the way back to Janet Reno, Attorney General under Bill Clinton,
Yes.
all of the list, Now, I believe in absolutely everything to do with the First and the Second Amendment. I believe you should be able to protect yourself. I believe that you should be able to, do the things that you can. But now let's go Socratically. Socratic dialogue in inductive or deductive logic, when you ask a question, come to a very logical conclusion that is actually definitive. What if, where people think that they can be independent of government, what if the government just doesn't issue you a license? What if they do something to your license where they deactivate it because you haven't done something? What if they shut off the water? What if they shut off the gas? What if they shut off the electricity? That's what's going to happen. We are going to be very soon defenseless. We're going to be coming into this era of dependency. Now, there are these groups of people that were in Egypt called the Hebrews under Pharaoh. And so he came for the deliverer, and they had 400 years of bondage, which was pretty rigorous and awful stuff. Now, how did the Lord protect his people? How did they prep? How did they prepare? Moses told them to do something as simple as could be, put blood on the doorpost, and the next day they were, marching out of Egypt. Where we're headed is going to be so spiritual, so unknown, that we really can't fathom what heaven is going to do with their agenda shortly. And there's going to be an event that is going to be in our lifetimes. Again, who knows exactly when. But the Lord is going to show every single person the state of their soul as God would judge it. That in itself will be a defining moment. I know about a dozen people who have experienced this, and one of them couldn't get up off the floor for 3 hours. There are millions, and I mean tens of millions of devout people that are expecting this thing called the warning. That will give mankind the grace, because we're so far gone as a culture. Heaven is going to move in a new dimension, in a new way, and absolutely meet the evil and supersede the evil. Where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more. And until we get that, and we can expect that in the not-too-distant future, and I have 2 full chapters on that, quoting some of the most amazing people in all of history of what they're saying. And do you know when they're pointing to these events? Literally now. People wrote about this 100, 200, 300 years ago in church history. They literally point to our age right now.
Absolutely. We're there right now. You just mentioned Moses, and one of the things I found so fascinating about what Moses kept telling the children of Israel was, be not afraid. That word, do not fear, be not afraid, Ted, is one of the most often repeated commands in the Bible. And when the Egyptians were gaining on the Hebrews against the Red Sea in Exodus 14, Moses said to the people, do not fear. Stand by and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. We are in an all-out war here. We are being pummeled on all fronts. We're over.
Absolutely, positively over. And we need to make that emotional and intellectual jump that God is now going to move. We're a spent bullet. And it's funny you mentioned Exodus 14. One of my favorite verses all through my adult life has been Exodus 14:14. I will fight your battle. I have no fear of this. This is the Lord's plan. Let's look at this on now a supranational level. Supranational, not super. And literally with preternatural gifts of like impassibility and word of wisdom, word of knowledge, where we're operating preternaturally. There is one word in the entire Old Testament and New Testament. It's about trust. If we know that God has a plan for transforming the world, if we jump on that bandwagon and do what God is asking, and we believe living in obedience, and that is the key word, to be in obedience, and it isn't this cosmic bellhop type stuff of, God is going to bless me here. God has a plan. God has an agenda. He's breaking down the old world because we were never meant to live like this. This is not how we were meant to live with the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, literally. I cannot think of a family now that is not experiencing great, great difficulty, and I mean to the point of stress. If there's probably one underlying theme in the book, The Great Transformation, is that all of these things that are going on around us are creating such stress that people are not functioning any longer. They're not functioning as we were ought to do. So that means if we want to use just pure logic, we need to abandon everything that is not essential now and focus just on spiritual. We need to put the entertainment craze away. We need to have a healthy balance of sports and entertainment, of where it's just that. We need to keep the Sabbath, which happens to be one of those 10 commandments, keep the Sabbath holy. Today all it is, you hear this thing of people say they're spiritual but not religious. Well, the chances are if you're not going to church and not reading Scripture, you'll think that you're spiritual, but then you'll be in yoga class on Sunday morning, watching TV for the rest of the day, and then people begin to drift away from anything that's spiritual, and then they no longer have a sense of sin or virtue, because they've been drowning now for years in the doctrine of relativism. And I guess if you look at your neighbor, you could think you're doing pretty well. But if you want to look at yourself in the light of divine truth, we may not be doing so well. And until we abandon all of the frivolous, we have no chance of getting back to where we should. And we're now at a place where everything that does not pertain to the most important things in life, we have to drop them, because when these events come, as I always say, Noah was the village idiot until it started to rain.
Well, you nailed it when you said the word obedience, Ted. And like Elijah said at the showdown with the prophets of Baal, all 450 of them, how long will you falter between two opinions? There's no room, Ted, for one foot in the world and one foot in the things of the Lord, is there, at this time?
No. And when it starts to rain, and let's say something cataclysmic happens, in other words, something major, because as they say, when your neighbor's out of work, it's a recession, but when you're out of work, it's a depression. There are now going to be many, many, many more people struggling due to an event coming that is going to be nearly impossible for people to cope. And they're not going to cope well, the vast majority of people. Why? Because they did not have the spiritual preparation. It's kind of the same thing as like an athlete training and maybe at an Olympic level. You know, there's years and years of preparation, eating right, sleeping right, you know, training right, all of the things to be able to run that race at the highest level. And if people have not been in spiritual formation in the Word of God, in spiritual reading, using their time wisely, keeping the Sabbath holy, keeping their priorities of Christ, spouse, kids, and job in that order. Because when the first one goes, the second was in its proper place, and the second and the third, everything lines up correctly if we keep our priorities. But if one of those are out of whack, everything's out of whack because it just isn't going to work. And the first one has to be our relationship to Christ. And if that is not where it should be, first and foremost, in our heart, mind, soul, and strength, we're going to perish. And when this storm comes, it's going to be brutal and it's going to be ferocious. And if we trust in God that He has a plan, will it be maybe difficult? Yes. Are we going to make it? Yes. Does God provide for His own? Yes.
Amen. Well, folks, you got to get this book, The Great Transformation, Finding Peace of Soul in Troubled Times. I get many emails. People are they're not in a place of peace. So, folks, you've got to get this book. The information is linked there, of course, at weekendvigilante.com. Ted, thank you for coming on the show. There's so much more to get into, but please come and see us soon.
Yeah, we'll do another one. And I should mention, if people do want to get it directly from us, they can go to sign.org, sign.org.
Sign.org. You heard it there, folks. Ted, thanks again for coming on the program. And again, like I said, please do come and see us soon.
Sheila, I will do your show anytime you ask me.
Well, Ted, thanks for that. Folks, the information is linked there at weekendvigilante.com. And I just wanted to remind people that the Kent Hovind jury trial reached a verdict yesterday. There is an update there at weekendvigilante.com from Eric Hovind on how you can get involved. Folks, Christians ought to be screaming from the rooftops of this blatant, egregious persecution that has gone on with Dr. Kent Hovind. Again, he served over 100 months in prison. He was found guilty out of 4 charges. He was charged with criminal contempt of court. From what I am understanding from his legal counsel, there is no minimum or maximum sentence on that particular charge of what the judge can give him on his sentence hearing June 14th. So it was a hung jury on 3 of the 4 charges. Hung jury means that they could not make a decision. And I think it's very important that people go to weekendvigilante.com, click on March 12th, go to the write-up from Eric Hovind on what you can do. We have to get behind this. We have to write letters. We have to support this. This is not a Kent Hovind issue. This is an issue that every Christian across North America here in the West needs to understand. If we don't stand up now, when? That is a question. If we don't stand up for a brother who has impacted millions of lives for a long time, a lot of his life has been devoted to winning souls to Christ. Folks, if we do not stand up and back a brother, then I say shameful. It's just absolutely shameful that people are not screaming from the rooftops on this issue. I have looked over these documents for the last few months very carefully, and I can tell you this is egregious. This is such a level of persecution. I don't care what camps out there that are saying negative things. If they are, they have not read the documents that I have. I can assure you, folks, go to freekenthovind.com, go to 2peter3.com, and I do believe that we are held accountable when we stand before the great white judgment throne of God. I believe we're also accountable for what we didn't do. We have a chance here to make some noise. We have a chance here to stand up collectively as the body of Christ and say, we've had enough. We've had enough of the egregious persecution. It is time to quit being armchair Christians and do something. I cannot stress this enough. When you have a man like this that has done so much to impact the kingdom of God, folks, it is imperative, it is crucial that you get behind this. So I urge you again to write letters, phone your Congress, phone your governor, get making some noise. I think that is so important, and I really ask you as a personal favor to me to do that. And folks, please do consider financially sowing into my ministry. Keep this show on the air. If you think it's worth keeping on the air, I'm asking you today to do what you can. We can all do something. It's only fair because a workman is worthy of his meat. If you want to eat the meat, it's only fair that you sow into it. Giving is a kingdom principle, as you know, and I think it's very important to keep shows like this on the air. We are watchmen on the wall, and I try to give you the best guests out there. It takes a lot of work. I'm not some big corporate-backed show. Please don't assume other people are giving. Do what you can to help support ministries that are making a difference. Do what you can, and I appreciate that very much. Folks, have got a great lineup next week. Hope everybody has a fantastic weekend. Good night, and God bless.
The Sheila Zilinsky Show is sponsored by SteveQuayle.com, offering a wide variety of products, links, headlines, and information for the end times. Order Steve's new book, Little Creatures, by visiting SteveQuayle.com. Dare to discover, learn, prepare, and be amazed.